I'm excited because it is the second week that we have launched our Tune-Up Tuesdays, and I am pretty pumped up. I went back to prepare a little bit on last night, and I just got that sense of nervousness because I really believe that this is something that all of us need to be consistently reminded of. Some things are might seemingly be things that you are, or might be elementary to you, but, when life hits us in so many different ways, sometimes life kind of knocks the truth out of us, so to speak. And so these are just reaffirming, the truths that most likely And for those that my heart is really for, is for those who are new to their Christian walk and they want to grow, they want to develop, and maybe they're just having a difficult time, like we talked about in the first recording on last week about, just having that challenge of understanding things that are from a spiritual perspective. And over the course of time and over the last 15, 20 years of my life, I have certainly learned so much from a spiritual growth perspective. And I want to pass that on. I want to share that because I want to see, all of us, something that is considered my, I don't know if you want to call this, my mission in life is to help people find their own heaven on earth. So experiencing God in the best possible way on this side of heaven. And so without further ado, just going to briefly do a recap. Again, session number 1 from last week has been shared. The link is on the picture, which you can't copy, but you should be able to click on the comment there. And I left the link there on Vimeo for you to go and click on that link or copy and paste that link and go and watch session number 1 and kind of like it's kind of an introduction, but also a segue into preparing you for what to expect here on today. I don't know what God has in store in terms of, where he wants me to, go with this. So if it has to, extend on to next week, then so be it. I desire for God to lead me. And I know you all do as well. But last week we talked about just the perspective of what we are all going through in so many different ways, and all of the things that I've, really heavily taken a lot of us down. I would say here over the last 2.5 years, it's been quite challenging. And I remember hearing one of my clients talking about certain things that they were wondering and asking, and they asked the question, why? And that stuck to me because, I never really thought about we do ask God why. And I know I've heard this preached in messages and such, but why do we ask why? And so I began to pray and I began to, really talk to God and ask why, think about it, try to remember, when was the last time something was so difficult, something was so challenging, something that came out of nowhere seemingly, and you just said, why am I experiencing this? Why am I going through this? Why me? Is something a lot of people say as well. Something that made you feel uncomfortable. So you ask why. And so the things that I kind of gathered from that is there is a yearning on the inside of us to seek an understanding and acceptance. And I think for the most part, a lot of us are there, when it comes to asking God why. I think as human beings, it's natural for us to gain an understanding. We don't want to just tap into things. We don't want to just be introduced to something. We don't want to just try something without having some type of understanding, or being given the opportunity to accept it. So I think it's just an innate, desire on the inside of us, in a constant yearning for us to be able to understand. And so that's one reason why we ask why. And I believe also it's, a way for us to connect with God. Asking why, for me, I know there's been times when I ask God why, and knowing He's God, knowing that His will is what's best for me. God, why? Can you walk me through this process? I need some guidance here. I don't want to walk this thing out with little to no comprehension or little to no, peace. I need your voice. I need your presence. I need you to walk me through this. And so oftentimes it's to connect with God. And then there's also times that we ask why because we are seeking peace of mind. There's nothing greater than having a peace of mind when something comes out of nowhere, when something so detrimental, something so traumatic, even drama in our lives, when we need that peace. So God, why? I don't get it. Like, we were just in a good place. And so to find peace of mind as well. And then there is the last thing that I came to understand is about finding closure. Oftentimes when we, are at that wit's end, so to speak, we are looking for some type of closure. We want to kind of close that book, so to speak. And so I believe that is another reason why we ask why. Why, God, why? And I know for the most of us, including myself, the response that we need to hear but don't want to hear is because it's His will. It is God's will. And it's like, okay, God, that doesn't give me as much of an understanding as I really need and desire. But the truth of the matter is that no matter what it is, the response can't change the situation, but it can change our response to the situation. So we may be dealing with something, we may be faced with something. And so although that didn't change the situation, it should tweak the way that we're viewing it, because now we understand that there's a purpose behind it. And regardless of whether we know that purpose, we know that God knows. And so I like to say to accept God's will is one thing, but it's another to accept God's will for our life. And so I was thinking about this last night. You hear the phrase, when it hits home, it's different. So like it could, drama and trauma can hit other people's lives. It can hit next door. And yes, you are saddened by it and you are riddled by it and you're praying for them and you're lifting them up and you care for them. But their issue or that situation in that home is going to feel a whole lot different when it hits our home. And so we want to, look at it from the perspective of we're looking on the inside in order to identify what it is that God is doing. And so one thing that I wrote last night is that God's will is His thoughts, His plan, His way, what He has thought, what He has spoken, what He has manifested, and what He allows. So when we ask God, why? We're asking God, why did you think that? God, why did you plan it that way? God, why did you go that way instead of this way? God, why did you speak that over my life? Why did you speak that over their lives? God, why did you allow this to manifest in my life? I wasn't ready for that. That's not what I want. And God, why did you allow this thing to happen to me at this very moment? Why did you allow this? This is too hard for me to handle. And so I was thinking, have you ever watched someone make something, like watching, one of those shows where they're creating things? Have you ever watched someone making something and then you become so intrigued that you wanted them to explain, like, how did you do that? Like, you wanted them to tell you the intricate details because you could be so fascinated. And some people might know, but I'm very fascinated with art, specifically abstract art. So there has been times that I have, been watching an artist, and in my mind, it's just, my mind is blown, because abstract art is not something that's sensible. It doesn't make sense to, the person that's viewing. It makes total sense to the artist themselves. But when you're watching an artist doing something, you're like, why did you just throw paint like that? Why did you put a swoop right there? Why did you put texture over there? Like, why? And so in that same way, when we are wanting to ask God why, it's actually the fact that we're needing to go deeper into understanding who God is. So when it comes to, and so here's what I recognize. I want to ask, why did you do that? And tell me your way. I wanted to ask that artist, tell me your way. How did you do that? Because I want to learn. I want to understand. If I could just peek into their mind, if I could just come to a place where I understand what their plan was. Like, did you sit down? Did you think about it? Did you strategize it? Like, where did this come from? It was just so amazing. And so isn't that what we want from God? To peek into his mind and to understand his thoughts, so that when we come to a place of clarity, we can release, our shoulders, the pressure is off. We find that peace, right? We find that that peace of mind, and eventually or come a little closer to that closure. And so my question to you is, how can you understand God if you don't know God? So I could be talking to those who have a relationship with God, and they are fortifying, and they're, investing in their relationship with God the same way they're investing in their earthly relationships. And we could also be talking about individuals who are just coming into the faith, and they're just learning what it means to even have a relationship with God, beyond just accepting Christ, beyond just acknowledging that I have accepted and I received God's salvation through Christ. What happens next? And so when you're dealing with things, when pressure is on you, and you're asking God why, and you're even where is this coming from? When are you going to do this? When, where, what, how, and why? All of those questions. The question then should be, how much do you know God? How much do you know God? And so clearly determining, what it means to know God. And for most of us, we know that the mind of God is far beyond ours. His thoughts are higher than ours. As the scripture says in Isaiah 55, verses 8-9, for my thoughts are not your thoughts, neither are your ways my ways, declares the Lord. As the heavens are higher than the earth, so are my ways higher than your ways, and my thoughts than your thoughts. And then we know that God desires to instruct and teach us his way. He wants us to know and understand him. And as Psalm 32:8 says, I will instruct you and teach you in the way you should go. I will counsel you and watch over you. See, he's invested in you, and he wants you to invest time in him to get to know him. He wants us to know him. And then there's another scripture here, but it says in Jeremiah 29:11-13, for I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord, plans to prosper you and not to harm you, plans to give you hope and a future. Then you will call on me and come and pray to me, and I will listen to you. You will seek me and find me when you seek me with all your heart. So although what we hear from God may not be what we want, we know that it's what's best for us. And so as a recap from last week, I talked about, what are the steps? Like, if there were actual steps in order to grow, in order to learn and develop ourselves in the area of our spiritual relationship with God. It's number one, getting connected to God. And then there's devotion. And then there's time. And then there's sacrifice. So I wanted to talk about today or tonight, how do we connect? How in the world do I get to know God? What are the first things that I should do in order to connect with God, in order to get to know him so that I can understand him? Because we're talking about character. And so how to connect with God. So the first thing that I wrote down, and this is a personal journey of mine, you all. So as I'm sharing this, things are just coming back to life in the way that God has taught me over the course of time. But the first thing that God gave me is we have to realize that God has already extended his hand to us. He has done the work to establish a connection with us. He has proven just how valuable we are to him. And here's a scripture for your reference, Romans 5:8. But God demonstrates his own love toward us, in that while we were sinners, Christ died for us. I want to sit there for a minute, because that being the very first step to establish a relationship with God, you want to think about your earthly relationships. There should be a level of intimacy in every relationship. There should be a level of connectivity and desire in every relationship. But it's going to start somewhere. It's not always mutual. It doesn't always happen at the same time. You don't fall in love with the person at the exact same time. You don't realize, you've met the love of your life at the very same time. So understanding that God was the instigator, he was the initiator, he started this thing, he proved his love to us from the start. Knowing that and relying on that, it should give us the desire to find out who he is. God, you loved me in my mess. You love me currently in my mess. You love me and accept me regardless of what I've done and regardless of what I will do. You've already accepted me. You've already forgiven me, and you already and will always love me. So then why is it not worth it for me to give myself to him, to spend time with him, to show him how valuable he is to me for giving me freedom in my mind and my soul and my life? And then there's another thing that God gave me, if you want to call this the second step, so to speak, to connecting with God, is to respond to him, respond to God by acknowledging and accepting his love. This is one of my favorites when I think about it. When someone tells you they love you for the first time, I don't know about you, but you see, I'm giddy right now. But the first time someone told me that they loved me, it was awkward. But have you or the other person, ever been in a situation where you got the opportunity to hear someone tell you that they love you, but you didn't reciprocate it? You didn't respond back. You were like, okay. That's the most awkward moment in life, because you're like, do I tell this person I love them just because we don't want this awkward moment? Or do I just say, okay, and you're just going to have to wait until I'm ready to tell you? But acknowledging God's love is so important, because it's like foundational. So God, thank you for loving me. Thank you for accepting me. Thank you for valuing me. I acknowledge your love. It's valuable to me. It tells me that I'm worth something, that I'm worth more than I even know. And then accepting his love. See, that's different. There's a difference between acknowledging it and then accepting it. Because you can acknowledge that your significant other loves you, but that doesn't mean you accept it. You may not be ready for it. You may not understand it. It may not make sense for you at that moment in time. So you may choose to not accept it. So there is a clear difference. But accepting his love tells me that not only have I acknowledged it, but I've opened myself up. God, I'm opening myself up to accept your love, despite how I feel, despite what I've been through, despite what other people think about me or feel about me. I'm accepting your love. It is invaluable, God, your love. So I accept your love. I want you all to be practicing these things. I want you to go back and keep listening to these steps, because I promise you, there is something about hitting a reset button and connecting, reconnecting, connecting, reconnecting. So going back through these steps will give you so much peace. And it just kind of like what they say, open up the floodgates, so to speak. When God sees you recognizing his love, you can literally feel him opening up himself to receive more of us, to help us along the way. And then the third thing that I begin to think about is reciprocate. Now, this could be natural. So you think about the fruit of the Spirit: love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. The fruit of the Spirit. When you reciprocate his love begins to show up in you, and around you. And what that looks like is now you feel his love in you, and you can't keep it in. You literally cannot keep the love of God on the inside. You have to be able to, yes, Veronica, you have to be able to give that love back in some form or fashion. You cannot keep that. That kind of love will make you go stir crazy. I have to. And so considering that, the more that you experience his love, the more you desire more of him. This is what encourages engagement. So as we talked about, relationship, devotion, time, sacrifice, devotion. When you are ready to engage with God because his love has overwhelmed you, you feel valuable, you recognize his value in your life, you want to engage with him. Now, I use this example, but I really didn't want to, but it's definitely applicable. When I was married, I am no longer married, so my ex-husband, and I was, this giddy wife, and I was raised by a Southern, Christian woman who definitely taught me how to take care of a man when it comes to feeding him. If I don't know anything else, I know that how important that is. Cooking for a man, feeding him, making sure his belly is fat, full is something that I took from one of the things that I took from my mother. And so I remember, just as a natural responsibility, I would cook food for him, breakfast, lunch, dinner. I remember cooking so much food at night, and he would eat dinner, and then portions of it would go to work with him the next day. And over the course of time, when his friends would come over, I would hear them talking, and they would say, "Oh, that's your wife. Yes, so that's who's be cooking that food for you. You be hooking him up," type of thing. And so I remember those moments, and it made me feel like, you know what? I love that feeling. I love that he's been bragging on me, and that he appreciates what I do for him. That's actually a natural desire that I have. And so when I talk about engaging, when you experience his love, when you experience how he sees you and how he values you, you want to spend time with him. You want to do more for him and with him. And so naturally, I wanted to cook him all kinds of stuff. I started grabbing cookbooks, to be able to really do more, because It feels so good to be valued. It feels so good to be bragged on. It feels so good for someone to appreciate the things that you do that are actually natural. And so in that same way, from a spiritual standpoint, when you are really experiencing God's love on another level, you want to devote to him, you want to spend time with him, and you want to, sacrifice for him. This desire is relationship. Yes, love languages are definitely important, Veronica. This engagement is relationship. This is saying, God, I want to know more of you. God, I want to spend time with you. God, you're worth more to me, to the point where I want to go the extra mile. I want to sacrifice what my flesh wants to do. I'd rather spend time with you. I'd rather learn from you. When you begin to connect those dots, the moment that you tap into that space where you are becoming more in tune with God, that's when you get to character. And we'll get into that on the next round, or at some point. But when you start operating in the character of God, have you ever recognized when you spend time with certain people a lot, like if you're around a certain family member or a certain friend and you're with them all the time, people know you're always going to be with such and such, you're always going to be with such. Every time I see you, you're with such and such, because you're so close. But eventually you start recognizing that you're taking on a few of their mannerisms. Even people start saying, y'all starting to look alike. But you start taking on their mannerisms, you start acting like them, you start saying some of their catchphrases, you start to kind of mimic them because you've been engulfed in their presence for so much. In that same way, the more that you engulf in the presence of God, the more his character becomes alive in you. So people start recognizing, you were going through some stuff. How can you maintain the level of faith and patience and peace that you have while going through what you're going through? That's the challenge I have for you all, is to get to a place where no matter what you're going through, no matter what you're experiencing, people around you are not gonna know. Now, this is not a bragging moment, but I remember when I lost my mother several years ago, and I probably took off. I can't remember exactly how long I took off, but I didn't take the normal, full 2 weeks off. I want to say I went back to work in about a week's time. And people were so shocked that I went back to work. And someone asked me, how are you back here? Or a couple of people actually asked me, how are you back here so quickly? And it really didn't dawn on me at the moment. I was just like, well, I just want to get out the house. I don't want to just sit at home. So I'm going to go back to work. But when I thought about it, it was because of the peace of God. His love, his joy, his peace, his patience, his kindness, his goodness, his faithfulness, his gentleness, his self-control had taken over me, because I had connected with him, because I found peace in him, despite the fact that I had lost my mother. I knew that he knew what was best. His will is what's best, even though it doesn't make sense, even though there's no possible way anyone can really and truly make sense of losing a loved one. It just won't add up on the earth. From a spiritual standpoint, we know that it's God's will. It's perfect. It's not comfortable, but his will is perfect. And when we embrace that, we begin to walk in such a way. Everybody around you will see you looking and acting and thinking different. And that's the whole point of salvation. People should be seeing God's light on you. They should be wanting to be attracted to you because of the elevated love that's coming and exuding out of you. And that's how you grow his kingdom. And it doesn't really seem as complicated when you look at it that way. It just takes a little devotion, in time. And the more that you do it, the more you're going to want to do it. And yes, life will knock the breath out of you. Life will, hurt you. Yes, Veronica, be the light. The moment that you come to that place where, God, it's your will. This is tough. This is rough. I don't want to go through this. I don't ever want to experience anything like this. But it's your will. And I want to embrace it. Because you're loving me in the midst of this turmoil. You're loving me in the midst of this craziness and this confusion and this lack of understanding and this lack of clarity and this lack of peace. You're still loving me. You still value me. And you know how much I can handle, even more than I do. You know more about me than I know of myself. So why wouldn't I just connect to you so that I can keep living this life and living a prosperous life despite what we're going through? So the next time you ask why, you're going to sit back and hear God, and whatever he reveals to you, you're going to accept it. You're going to realize he established this thing. He set me up for greatness, despite what I'm experiencing, despite what life has brought my way. I know that I'm safe in him. I know that he's going to protect me. I know that he's going to bring me out or through. Because sometimes people want to get out of a situation. You can't run from a situation, because if you run from it, you're going to run right into another situation very similar to it. But sometimes we have to actually go through those things, because he's fortifying us. He's strengthening us. He's developing us. He's doing whatever he knows is best for us at that moment in that season in our lives. Well, that is really all. I set aside an hour for this, but I don't know if I'm going to need a whole hour until there's more engagement. And I do intend, as this meetup group grows, I do intend for more people to be a part of it, and open it up for, thank you, Veronica. You'll have the opportunity to really dialogue, open up conversations, questions and answers, all of those things. So I'm definitely looking forward to taking advantage of the other half of those 30 minutes so that we can really engage and get to know each other. We want to stay safe, so I don't expect to have meetups in person just yet. But if the demand is there and if the desire is there, I will definitely pray about it and consider it. But the last thing I'm going to read it, because I actually typed out a prayer, and I'm actually going to share this with you all. I'm going to type it up. So the prayer is, Dear Heavenly Father, it's been tough. This problem, this situation, trial, this trouble I'm facing is consuming me. All I can do is feel the pain and discomfort. I want to know why. I want to understand so I can find peace. I realize the best way for me to understand you is to get to know you better. Father, help me to connect or reconnect with you. Teach me how to be devoted to building a relationship with you. Show me how to give you uninterrupted time out of my busy schedule every single day. Reveal what I must do to sacrifice and please you. Create in me a clean heart and renew the right spirit in me. Amen.